Elizabeth Hashagen. Welcome to our live special report, The New Normal. This pandemic has been so hard on our families, especially families who have divorced parents and split their time between two homes. So how do families now work to get back on track? And is there a way for one parent to make up for lost visitation? There's so many different issues, and today we're getting some answers from Joseph Trotti. He's an attorney and partner at Vishick, McGovern and Melizzo. Before we get to Joe, we do want to hear from you. So for the next half hour, we will be answering your questions. You can submit them on our social media pages right now. All right, thanks so much for joining us this morning, Joe. And this is such an interesting time that you've been navigating for these families. So talk to me about some of the legal issues that have come up here.
Well, good morning, Elizabeth. So the issues that have come up are really, and the calls that we're getting from our clients is, how are we going to deal with parenting time during the pandemic? How are we going to deal with school and daycare? How are we going to deal with all of these issues? For example, daycare is such an important part of parenting time because the parents have to allocate who is going to take the child, who is responsible for the period of time, and then what happens with the pandemic when there no longer is daycare, and then we lost school. These are all the calls that we're getting from our clients. These are what we've been trying to navigate through and resolve, and that has been a steady basis since mid-March.
And how do you navigate these custody issues? Is there any real guidance out there?
Well, as far as custody issues, a lot depends on, is there a case pending? If there's a case pending, it's a little bit easier because there are attorneys involved. There perhaps is an attorney for the child involved. As you know, in all court cases involving custody and parenting time, the court appoints an attorney for the child. And so you have a representative of that child that you can speak with. So those cases are a little bit easier because there's something pending, there's something going on. Maybe there's an agreement in place that we can talk about and try to modify or resolve with an advocate for the child involved. It's a little more difficult if there are no cases pending and we are not allowed to talk to the children if we're representing a party. Those present problems, and those are where the interesting issues arise.
I know one of the biggest questions right now on the mind of most parents is, what's going to happen with schools? And if parents have different levels of comfort in sending their kids back to the classroom, what kind of information would you give them in trying to make this decision when they're maybe not, living together in the same house and making joint decisions?
So that's an interesting question, Elizabeth, right? So the first issue is what's going to happen with schools. Is it a state issue? Is it a federal issue? Look at clearly the governor is saying it's a state issue. Clearly he's going to impose his mandate and he's got a protocol in place. And I think August 7th he'll make a decision on which way we're going to go. So that's one issue. The second issue is what arises when parents disagree on the safety of the children. And remember, the courts are there to resolve some of these issues. And the courts will always be looking to see, is this truly a pandemic safety issue? Or is it really an alienation issue where one parent is trying to get more parenting time or custody, or worse, get child support based on these changing circumstances by invoking the safety tag and saying it's really a safety issue. And that's where I think interesting issues are going to arise. And I think that's where the courts are going to be challenged as to what is the background, what is the basis here for this parent saying they are comfortable or not comfortable letting the child attend school. I think it's a two-part question.
Yeah, and we've also heard the president, of course, weighing in on this, talking about, possibly defunding schools. And then you hear the governor saying that, no, these are state decisions, period, that is the law. So what is the law when it comes to educating our kids?
In researching this, it appears that it is a state issue. I believe that the governor is correct on this and that he has the final authority on how he is going to handle the education issue. And I think that the governor is already putting in place with a task force what are going to be the protocols, what are the safety issues, is there going to be filtration system, maybe pods, is there going to be more outdoor activity. I think that they're doing their research right now so they can come up with the correct answer. But I think it's going to come down to the states. I think the president is going to try to do what he can to help the economy. I think that's his mindset. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to the governors, and I think it's going to be their plans that are going to be put into effect, whether it's in August or September of this year.
I think there's also this question of enforcement, and we've seen it in our own municipalities where, people are looking and saying, hey, people aren't following the rules here, snapping pictures, taking videos that end up in press conferences. What's going to happen in our schools? There's, some different plans that districts have where there are one-way hallways and teachers wearing masks, social distancing on school buses, but who's watching to make sure that school districts are following these guidelines, and kind of what recourse do parents have if they feel as though the school district isn't doing the right thing?
So I think that most schools, like other businesses that are reopening, are submitting their plans as to safety and protocols that will be followed. I believe that they're going to be monitored. I believe that there is some way that the state is going to be involved and to monitor the situation to see that the protocols are being followed. And I think this governor is serious enough, and that he will either slow down the process or close the process or, turn to remote if they're not being followed. I think there will be a system in place, and I think it'll give the parents some feeling of that their issue is being resolved, in that their children are going to be safe. I think that there are people who are just not going to send their children back to school because that's their mindset, and they're literally, naturally, and realistically afraid. But I think that it will be monitored, and I think we'll have a pretty good system. I'm very confident that the state will come up with a system to monitor it.
All right, Catherine wants to know, when both parents work, who will end up teaching the children, making them lunch, make sure they actually are doing the work, especially if a child has an IEP?
Yeah. So, and the IEP issue is interesting because the children are challenged, and they have certain rights and remedies that other children don't have. For example, extra time, being able to get materials in a way that other children can't get. It's going to be a problem. If you have parents working together and not in a divorce situation and it's amicable, those things are between the parents, and they're going to have to figure out how to do it. Or if we're allowed to have tutors come back into the house, that is something else that could be explored. That is not the problem as I see it. The problem is going to be when two parents are fighting and they're both working and they're seeing this as an opportunity for the other parent to either shun responsibilities, or worse, as they see it as an opportunity to go to court and say, I am now or should be the custodial parent. Judge, give me the children, give me child support. That's where I think the real problem is going to be. Amicable parents that are working together, I see them resolving it. It's the other ones where I think you're going to have very interesting issues coming up in the courts as to who should be the custodial parent.
Right, because parents don't necessarily agree on how homeschooling should go. So if there is any type of a distance learning plan, you really need to be, for lack of a better term, on the same page about how to handle that, because you can't have it two different ways for the kids.
Absolutely correct, Elizabeth. And the other problem with IEP, remember, they're challenged to begin with. Some are just slow in reception, some are slow in other areas as far as learning. The whole remote process and learning at home is already complicated by their IEP. It makes it even more difficult. You would think that it would be easier, but it's exactly the opposite, because they don't have the comfort they used to have. Being in a classroom where a teacher is saying 7, 8, 10 times over and over, reassuring the child of what they need to do and how they can best learn. That doesn't happen at home because the parents are not professionals. So it's even more of a challenge there with an IEP student. But I still think that if parents are getting together, they're going to figure out a way, whether it's with a tutor or online learning, to be able to do it. I'm more concerned when there is animosity between the parents. I think that's where disaster can happen, and I also think that's where children are going to suffer.
Okay, and Hector is asking what, I guess, are the rights, or what's going to happen with kids that have severe persistent asthma and are told that they have to wear a mask all day in school. That's not good for them. Yeah,
that's clearly not good for them. I think, since the court is saying, since the judge and the courts are saying safety first, they're saying that, and since the governor is clearly saying we're not going to use the children as a litmus test, they are not going to be our guinea pigs, I think they will carve out exceptions for children who are already at risk, whether it's a breathing issue or some other compromise issue, making them more vulnerable. I think that they will be able to get a carve out and be able to maybe stay home several times a week and learn remotely. Listen, we've been practicing this remote learning since March. I think some of the kinks have been worked out, but I think that there'll always be safety first. I think that's where the governor's going to lean.
All right, Dennis is asking, how do we protect older staff who have medical issues that may make them more at risk?
And you're talking about staff in school or staff at work.
Staff, yeah,
I,
staff at a school.
it's very interesting because what's older too in this generation? What is older as far as age is concerned? It used to be a lot older than it is now, Elizabeth. So especially for myself, but I think that again, I think that no one will be prejudiced when it comes to employment in these areas. I think that they will be given an opportunity to be able to be employed, and if they have to, and maybe do it in a different way than they're doing it now, I think that those are not going to be problems. I think that they will find a way to protect them. And again, I do not see any of them being prejudiced or discriminated against. I think they will be able to retain some type of employment in a different way, perhaps sometimes at the facility, sometimes in another way, to be able for them to carry on. I do not see that as something that's going to be a problem. I think that that will be resolved. This governor, whether you're in favor or against him, has been working on this for a while. He knows what the school issues are. There is a task force in place. There is a parents involved, teachers involved, staff involved in the best way to handle this. I think we'll have a definite answer by August 7th or shortly thereafter.
Yeah, I know. I was reading an article. I wish I could pull it up right now, but they were talking to the teachers union, and one of the presidents of the teachers union saying that they're going to be trying to work with the superintendent so that if there are people that are immune compromised or have health issues, that then those employees might be identified to also work with the kids from home, and they won't know that until all of those specifics are put into place. So I think, we have kind of a long way to go in all of this, because we need to figure out exactly what the protocols will be, and we're getting some of that guidance now. So we're going to be continuing our conversation straight ahead. So you can keep sending in your questions right now on our social media pages. You're watching News 12. Good morning. Welcome back to our live special report, The New Normal. This morning, we're taking your questions about schools and issues you might have in your home when it pertains to custody issues. So you can send in your questions right now on our Facebook pages. And joining us is Joe Trotti. He's a partner at Vishik, McGovern, and Melizzo. So we do want to start with some of those custody issues. What happens if a child needs to quarantine, but typically travels back and forth between the parents' home? How does that get handled?
So, very interesting question, Elizabeth, and something that we've been getting many calls from our clients. And so, what's going to happen when you're involved in one of these situations, and if you had to go to court, what is the court going to do? They're going to always look at what's the best interest of the children. Parent has an absolute right to protect their children, and what the courts will look at in the case that you cannot resolve it is, what did you attempt to do? So if a parent is consistent and say that, we were exposed or my children were exposed, what they're going to do and quarantine, they quarantine their children, they quarantine themselves, okay, they're going to be looked upon as someone who is following the guidelines and more likely to get what they want. So for example, one of our clients was ill. She let the children stay with the other parent because she thought it was safer to be away, gave up her visitation time, and then sought to get the children back and have the father quarantine. That's what a parent's rights are, to try to protect the children. And that is what the court is always going to look at. What is the best interest of the children? Not so much the parents, what is the best interest of the children? And a parent always has that right to communicate and to be able to make a decision with the child's best interest in place. That's what will happen.
So is there a lot more technology happening with visitation rights in that type of a scenario, the FaceTimes and all that kind of stuff, if the kid really shouldn't be leaving the house?
Yes. So again, in my experience and in dealing with our clients, if you can set up a system where you're giving extra FaceTime or extra Skype time or Zoom time, any way so that the parent who is not seeing the child can stay in touch and stay in communication, then the courts will always be in favor of that. And I encourage all of our clients, when they're calling, set up those schedules, work out those schedules as much as you can, because that is the protocol that the courts are looking for in this era. Because it's the loss of contact, it's the possible alienation, Elizabeth, that drives the court insane, as far as they're really seeing this not as a pandemic issue, but some other underlying issue. But if a parent is making that kind of attempt for contact and maybe makeup time down the road when they're not able to see the child, that always is in the child's best interest and ultimately in the parent's best interest if they were to have to go to court.
And I know for a lot of people, even the best relationships are under so much strain right now. And especially if you're both working from home, or, you're just not used to spending that much time with your partner. And if memory serves me correct, you were working on something to try to keep those families out of the court system and try to figure out a way to make this work better.
Correct. So we've always been involved in a collaborative law process, whether we actually called it that or not. That's what we do at our firm. And we've always, when this started, I started working on a plan on how that can work. I have many cases right now where both parents are at home. They're not getting along, weren't getting along well, and now they're having to deal with this issue. They have to deal with relocation, maybe take them out of the city or the state, and what to do when school comes, what happens with summer camp, who's going to be in charge of all of that. So I was working with parents early on working these things out so they can lower their attorney's fees, stay out of the court system, work out something where I think, in the experience that I have, it will ultimately end up. So if you're thinking that way, you're better able to guide the parents on what's going to happen. If you're more realistic about what a court will ultimately do, you can save the client a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of, aggravation, because you know exactly where it's going to end up. Work out that plan. I've been working with parents since March to be able to do that.
Now, I think for a lot of people that have some custody issues, if the other parent wants to take a child on a trip, go camping, or head out of state, does that change now? Because do both of you have to be in agreement, especially with the different quarantine rules now in place?
Yeah, it changes dramatically, Elizabeth. So normally you would have parents who have a custody agreement, and they have a certain right to go out of state or out of the country, and that's all changed. And what the courts are doing, and I think they're doing an exceptional job, is they're literally taking letters or invitations for a quick Skype conference with the court as to how the court would handle it. And that's it's a good remedy to have in the background in case you can't resolve it, because it all changes. But if a parent thinks that they are just going to play the pandemic card to stop a parent going to another state or to another area, that's not going to work. It has to be, you have to have your facts, what's happening in that other state. What I worry about as an attorney and representing clients, I really worry about what's going to happen if the child goes to a state and cannot come back. That is my real fear, because you can say, well, the other parent is not doing what is right, they're violating the law, and all of these other issues. But the problem is going to be during the time that all of that is happening and you're litigating with the court, the child may not be able to come back. And how are you going to protect that parent who you advised to either let go to another state or a court did? What are you going to do in those situations? So those are arguments that need to be made. I've had those arguments with the judges over the last couple of weeks. I'm concerned. Florida, for example, is a hotbed. Who can trust that if they were to agree right now to send their child to Florida, that A, it's safe for the child, which it may or may not be, but more importantly, as far as parenting time and custody, maybe that child can't come back for weeks, okay? And now they have to start a school in September in Florida. And then do we really want to change them from that school if they're doing well? These are big problems that parents use, okay? And I think they're big problems that you have to be able to talk to your client about and say, this is a possibility that can happen in a relocation issue during the pandemic.
All right, we're going to continue our conversation straight ahead. You're watching The New Normal. We'll be right back. You're watching News 12. Welcome back to our live special report, The New Normal. So I guess, Joe, my question would be, what's the big takeaway from all of this for families who are trying to navigate this really confusing time?
Yeah, from what's been my experience over the last couple of months, it's a very fluid situation. When we're in front of the judges and the courts, this is unprecedented, and the courts expect everyone to have a fluid, follow through as to what's going on. So my big takeaway is, if you're going to play the pandemic card, that's not going to work. Okay, you're going to have a really good reason why there should be a restriction on parenting time. And I think the other thing that's going to happen is, what systems are you following? Remember, if you're allowing your children to be in areas where they could be exposed, the court's going to, it's going to harp on that. It's going to say, well, okay, yeah, you don't want them to go away, but you're not following it yourself. So my big takeaway is, come up with a plan, make it consistent, let it be in the best interest of the children. And if you do that, okay, you will be rewarded in coming up with a system that's both fair to your child and to the other parent. Because remember, courts are very interested in joint custody. They want to see both parents involved. Anything short of that, okay, and you're not going to get the desired result. So I have a plan in place that's realistic that you're following, and I think that you'll be best served.
All right, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate all your expertise this morning, and we thank you at home for your questions. I'm Elizabeth Hashagen. We have more news straight ahead right here on News 12.
Time and temperature brought to you by